The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Well, that was fast. Last week, we did an episode about Jim Montgomery getting fired from his post as head coach of the Boston Bruins, and he's already found himself a new job. He's the new head coach of the St. Louis Blues. Why did this happen so quickly?
Well, Jim Montgomery is a rare coach to become available. I think it's, was pretty clear to anyone, including the Bruins themselves and anyone who saw when he was fired in Boston, that he would only be out of work about as long as he wanted to be. And I think in this case that there may have been at least one other team that was at least sniffing around him. And so given the long history he has with the St. Louis organization, he was a player for the Blues way back when. You'll recall after he was fired in Dallas, they gave him kind of his next chance on Craig Berube's staff as an assistant. And, they're in a position where they see a world where, when they get back into a more competitive window than they're in today, that he could be a long-term fixture behind their bench. I mean, he got a 5-year deal. And let's face it, Drew Bannister, in this case, the departing coach from St. Louis, doesn't really get a fair shake, but it's the business. The Blues knew that they couldn't afford to wait if they wanted to get Jim Montgomery. And so it took decisive action, and it took less than a week from the time he coached his last game in Boston to when Jim Montgomery will make his debut behind the Blues bench on Monday against the Rangers.
Do we know who that other team sniffing around Jim Montgomery was?
No, there's just some talk that there were another team or other teams that were interested in him. And it just speaks to the kind of coach, we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who just won the Jack Adams Award. I mean, his record in Boston speaks for itself in terms of the wins and losses. I mean, a pretty incredible 2+ year run there. Ends up sort of being the fall guy for their difficult start for their underperforming players at the beginning of this season. But, no one looked at where Boston was and thought, oh, this isn't a coach who knows what he's doing. And so, other teams were interested in Montgomery, or at least kicking around the idea of it. And the Blues, right from the beginning, a lot of people felt that he was going to end up in St. Louis. I didn't necessarily envision it happening inside a week, but that's what it takes. And as I mentioned, it's unfortunate circumstances for Drew Bannister, but he didn't have a ton of leverage security there. He signed a 2-year deal in May after being the interim head coach for the balance of last season after Berube was fired. He was made expendable because, someone with pretty impressive track record who probably wasn't going to be unemployed too long was sitting there. And, Doug Armstrong has never been afraid of making what I would call a bold decision, a hard decision. The Blues GM is known for some of the trades he's made over the years, can be a very decisive guy. And, if you think the dream candidate's there to be hired, you go out and hire him. And that's what St. Louis did.
So the fact that Jim Montgomery was available when he was, and the fact that they reacted as quickly as they did, you're right. Considering how Doug Armstrong is, that makes total sense. Just in my head, and maybe this is just me wandering around, I wonder if that interest in Jim Montgomery extended as far back as the offseason. I mean, Drew Bannister only getting the 2-year contract. You've mentioned a couple times the security wasn't all that secure. What if there was a scenario where the Bruins go through the season that they go through? Maybe they were thinking about letting Jim Montgomery go, and then the Blues were like, well, hey, you know what? We're here. We're ready. This is just me wondering aloud and not me necessarily putting anything there, unless you have a wrinkle to this story.
No, I mean, are you suggesting they tampered with him? Because I got no reason to believe that.
No. I am not using the T word over here. No.
Okay, well, I thought that you're winking at the idea that this may have been cooked up ahead of time.
I was just wondering, just because the interest is there. That was really fast between those two.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an easy decision to. I'm not saying it's an easy decision to make, but it's an easy decision if you're Jim Montgomery. I mean, the organization so well. His wife is from the St. Louis area. He's, coached as an assistant coach with them as recently, 4 years ago. I mean, he knows the organization in and out. He knows the GM. He knows the ownership situation, and they're willing to give him a 5-year deal. So, I mean, he got, he basically got fired and then got a raise and got a longer term contract. I mean, which is actually quite common. I mean, that happened to Bruce Cassidy when he was fired by the Bruins and was hired by Vegas within days. Sheldon Keefe ended up with a longer, more lucrative contract with New Jersey, not too long after the Leafs, fired him after last season. And so, coaching, the coaching carousel spins pretty quick these days, but, I don't think anything was necessarily cooked up ahead of time, but clearly you had two parties, I think, that were comfortable with each other. Doug Armstrong said it. He just felt that this was the right guy for their team. And while you can't always let the circumstances get in the way of making the right decision, the circumstances aren't particularly kind here. Like there's no way this is nice. I mean, Drew Bannister coached a game Saturday night with the Bruins in Long Island, and then Sunday morning he finds himself fired flying home from the road trip, and his successor's coming in, and it's someone that's well known to everybody. So I don't think this. I'm not going to look at this as I don't think this is like a conspiracy theory stuff. I think it's more the Blues were surprised that Jim Montgomery was available to be hired right now. So that's basically the scenario for me, Julian. They just didn't think they'd even have a chance to hire him now, and you and I wouldn't have thought that entering the season. And, with the Bruins season sort of taking the turn it did with Boston firing him last Wednesday, it forced them to act. And, I think it was, as long as he wanted to work, as I said, he was going to have an opportunity, whether it was in St. Louis or somewhere else. And the Blues couldn't let the opportunity pass them by. And so, it's probably a tough decision. I can't imagine that was a comfortable conversation, letting Drew Bannister go, 20 games essentially after you've hired him as the full-time coach. And really through no fault of his own, other than there's a better candidate out there, a more experienced candidate, a more accomplished candidate, and one that the Blues really wanted.
I feel bad for Drew Bannister. Like, I get it. The Blues weren't necessarily world beaters. They did not have the greatest record. There are teams with worse. But, yeah, you get the contract in May he signed, and then this happens to you. I feel bad. I think I'm allowed to feel bad for someone. I mean, I'm allowed to feel bad for anyone who loses their job, but also in this case where he did work his way up from interim to full time, and now this. Yeah,
I mean, it's the ugly side of sports that does come up from time to time. I think absolutely on a human level, it stinks. There's no good way to put it. I mean, I guess the flip side is he did get a chance to be a head coach in the NHL, however briefly. He obviously signed a deal that's more lucrative than what he was being paid in the American Hockey League, which is where he was when Craig Berube was fired about a year ago now. And you just hope that he can land on his feet. But it's certainly not fair. But I mean, look, sports is a very competitive business. It can be a very cutthroat business. It's about winning. And yep, I think ultimately I can see where management's coming from. They feel they have a better chance to win with Jim Montgomery as their coach than Drew Bannister. I just think Montgomery is proven more in the league. He came off a very, very successful run in Boston. No guarantee this works, of course. I mean, it's a bold call. And kind of an interesting time when you think about it. The Blues have instituted this succession plan where Alex Steen's going to take over as a GM in a year and a half or so. Now they've got, what they feel is their long-term coach. As much as any coach could be long-term, is not particularly a job we associate with long-term, but we sort of can see where the organization is charting its course. And obviously they're hoping that the results on the ice follow because, they've kind of been spinning their wheels a little bit, doing a bit of a retool on the fly here. And, I think that they're trying to get back to a winning culture as soon as they can. I don't think that they have any designs on, falling to the bottom of the league or doing the full scale rebuild we've seen elsewhere.
Yeah. All right. The coaching carousel moves on, and Jim Montgomery back in a coaching job. Let's talk about Auston Matthews if we can. Back from his time in Germany and skating over the weekend, not available for the team on Sunday. Wondering when he'll be back in the lineup next, CJ.
Well, the hope is that he can get it in there on Wednesday, and that might be a little bit ambitious. It would only leaves time essentially for one full practice with the team on Tuesday before they fly down to Florida and play the Panthers on Wednesday night. So if it's not Wednesday, I think the odds are very good it's next Saturday when they're in Tampa. But Auston, the good news for the Leafs is he's now has skated a couple times since returning from Germany. He told reporters he's feeling a lot better than when he went there. And, for the first time kind of addressed the situation publicly in which he, said part of what we already knew, which is that this was an injury that came up initially during training camp. He managed it through the first 13 games of the season that he played. it got to a point where it was getting worse and they decided to step back. But it was, in that window when he first took the initial game or two off, and he was described as day to day, and it just didn't get any better. And so he wanted to be proactive by going to Germany, that he and the team worked in lockstep on that decision. He spent 5 days over there getting treatment last week and now appears to be on the road to recovery. I mean, the truth of this is we won't really know probably for months, like did this pay off? Was this, a good outcome for the Leafs? If he only misses 8 or 9 or 10 games even, and the Leafs just so happens have won a good chunk of those games, so that does make the loss not felt as acutely. But he comes back and he's somewhere close to 100%. He's the player we've known him to be. He's productive, he's healthy, and he's able to help the Leafs as they get into a playoff push. I mean, I think then you'll look at this and be like, who cares about that little thing in November when he disappeared and everyone was, a lot of mystery around his situation. That's the optimistic outlook, but it's obviously an injury he's dealing with it's not like a broken bone that heals after X amount of time. Probably a soft tissue type of injury that, you don't really know until he gets into the grind of the season again. And it will be a grind. The Leafs have actually just come through a very quiet part of their schedule, but they still have a bunch of back-to-backs coming up. And obviously, just as with any team, there's not a lot of time for your body and your mind to heal when you get back into the battle. So, it does seem like I think we'll see him this week back in the Leafs lineup. But as I say, I don't think we'll really know what it all means until we see, what version of him comes back and can he stay healthy after this? And that's the hope. I know from the organization, they've been very patient with the situation because they do believe there's a world where he gets back to basically 100%. And so they see this as sort of short-term pain for a longer-term gain. But we'll see.
Okay. Again, feels like we keep doing this on these podcasts now. We keep just looking around the league at other people getting injured, and it feels as if there's some other star player that gets hurt. Did you see Kirill Kaprizov got hurt over the weekend, wasn't available to play for Minnesota against Calgary?
Yeah, but the good news there is it's not as serious as it looked. He had a very sort of awkward collision with Drake Caggiula in their game in Edmonton. And, just the way that looked, I mean, you could understand why there was some concern, but, after getting the testing done and consulting with doctors, it seems as though, he avoided anything too long term, which is obviously huge news for Minnesota. I mean, the Wild have been one of the early surprises in the season. I think that there's a case that Kaprizov should be getting, at least he'd be in your Hart Trophy conversation if you were ever having to vote this early in the year, which we don't have
Absolutely.
to. But I mean, certainly been one of the better players in the league. And again, a huge driver of the success that's come in Minnesota, probably surprising a lot of us through a quarter of the schedule, give or take. And so, welcome news, Sunday, basically that he escaped something that's going to be long term. And so it seems like his situation is a little more day to day than week to week. And that's a good thing. But it was a very weird hit. I don't know if you saw the play in Edmonton. I don't think it was malicious. It just, a collision in the neutral zone and it didn't look good. I mean, my initial thought when seeing it was like, oh, that could be something a little long term. But, fortunately that's not the case for Kaprizov, and he got some better news than some of the stars out there. I mean, I don't even know if we've updated the Ovechkin situation, but he's going to be gone 4 to 6 weeks. And, obviously Matthews ended up missing at least 3+ weeks, maybe 4 weeks by the time all is said and done. I don't think it'll be that long, on the shelf for Kaprizov in this one.
Good, because Kirill Kaprizov is one of this league's most special players. It's funny to look at his resume. Yes, he has a Calder Trophy, but this is a guy who is coming off 3 consecutive 40-goal seasons and is absolutely a joy and talent to watch, especially skating wise when he's in the offensive zone and just dipsy doodles around everybody. It's just, I love watching this guy. So seeing that he was hurt, I did not like that.
They've never had a player like that in Minnesota either, right? I mean, that's part of the allure in a sense, is like he's one of one for this franchise. It's now, it's over 20 years old. The Wild have been around for a while now, and they had Marian Gaborik in the early years, and Gaborik at his best was a very, very, very good player and a great goal scorer. the sort of guy that pulled you out of your seats. But I think Kaprizov's on another level. It's their first true superstar. It's why it's so important for them to get him signed. I mean, he's got 1 year after this one on his contract, and we've already heard Craig Leopold, the Minnesota owner, come out and say basically we will not be outbid for him. Which, I love that he said that, but it doesn't help the team's leverage going into a negotiation when you're already like, we will absolutely pay more than everybody else. I mean, I would love it if my boss came out and said that about me 1 year heading into a negotiation. But the good news here for Kaprizov is, I think he's beloved in Minnesota, and as you say, it's nice that it seems like he'll be back sooner than later and not facing any kind of long-term layoff here.
Goes without saying, but all of your bosses should be paying you top dollar, CJ.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course.
I got a couple expiring contracts this year. Maybe I have you negotiate them for me.
I feel like maybe Adam Wilde should do some of that. The money man, let the money man do that. I will provide whatever support you want for those contracts, but I don't know if you want me negotiating those. I don't know. You're better at math than me. Don't let me handle your finances.
All right.
Yeah. What did you think? We did talk about the Ryan Reaves, Darnell Nurse debacle last week. What did you think of the weird back and forth between Darnell Nurse, where he talks to the media about what happened, but then Ryan Reaves' brother Jordan takes to Instagram and goes the other way? What did you think of that back and forth?
Well, I mean, look, it's two pretty tough customers, two pretty proud guys. And, Nurse essentially said, I don't want to take him out of context, but he did say basically that Reaves is a player that hits to hurt people. And you know what was going on there. Isn't that the spirit of the main quote he delivered?
Yeah, it's Darnell Nurse. It's pretty obvious what's going on there. That's one part of what was said throughout that media availability. Jordan Reaves' comment, which he, again, was a comment on Instagram. You could tell that by looking at your skates, is what he wrote back.
Right. And look, Darnell did, to his credit, did say that he was somewhat at fault for the hit, that he should have had more awareness on the play. But he just noted, I'm 6'4", and there's a lot of my body he could have hit instead of hitting just my head. It's going to get dusted off again. I think in January, the Leafs and the Oilers play. It'll be just interesting to see what fallout, if any, is there. I don't believe we've heard from Ryan Reaves yet. The Leafs,
we haven't.
Don't want him talking while he's out suspended. So it must be hurting him because he likes to talk, first of all, but also there's this whole thing going on, right? I mean, Darnell Nurse, did come out and look, he's got a right to say what he would have said in Edmonton, but I'm sure Ryan Reaves would like to probably clarify on some level that he's hitting to hurt, but he wasn't hitting. I don't think there's malicious intent on that hit. Quite honestly, I think he mistimed it. It was delivered in an unfortunate way, but Nurse was eligible to be hit in that case. He was coming around the net with the puck. You're Ryan Reaves, you're a fourth liner. Your job by definition is to get in on the forecheck, to give energy to your team, to make life hard on the other team. He was clearly trying to do that, and didn't have great consequences in that play. So, it's. I'll be interested to hear what Ryan Reaves says. I don't know when he's going to finally get to his moment in front of the microphones. It might not be until this 5-game suspension is up, in which case the whole story might have blown over by then.
Sure.
Because it's going to be another week plus from now. But, if it comes any sooner than that, I'll be curious to see how he feels about, some of that back and forth. And look, Ryan Reaves' brother, for anyone who doesn't know Jordan, he played in the CFL, big man, just like Ryan, played a tough position, understands the competitiveness of sport, understands physicality, and obviously he's got his brother's back, which is pretty much what you'd expect from any set of brothers or siblings.
Exactly. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Storyworth. If you're spending time with loved ones for the holidays, chances are you're going to hear a lot of stories, the ones you love to hear and the ones you've heard too many times. But have you ever wanted to help your loved ones capture those timeless stories, not just for themselves, but for you, your entire family, and future generations? It can seem daunting to write an entire book of life memories, but Storyworth makes it fun and easy. This sounds like a really cool concept, CJ.
Yeah, I should get Coburg Papa on this because
yes, he should.
Basically, you get an email every week. You have to respond to that question, and it tells you something about your life. All those email responses get compiled in a book that you can keep for generations in your family. And let's face it, time moves fast, and some stories get lost to time. And this is a way to fight back against that.
You can ask questions like, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? What's the farthest you've ever traveled? Or how did you even get to school every day? Storyworth makes the entire process a breeze. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, long or short, it doesn't matter. Families love Storyworth, and that's why it has more than 35,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot, with millions of stories preserved since they were founded over 10 years ago. Help your family members share and capture their stories this holiday season with Storyworth. Storyworth.com/Johnston and save $10 on your first purchase. That's STORYWORTH.com/Johnston to save $10 on your first purchase. Storyworth.com/Johnston.
Check your email, Dad.
I think we have just one topic before I want to run over to Ask CJ and get some questions in. We talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins all the time, but we have to talk about Sidney Crosby reaching the plateau of 600 goals. It did come in a losing effort, but still an incredible achievement from one of the greatest players to ever play the game. What do you have to say about Sidney Crosby?
Well, nothing better sums up this whole story, this whole moment in time, than the fact he hits that very special milestone in a 6-1 loss. It's hard to ignore those two things. I mean, there's not enough positive words could be said about Sidney Crosby, but what he's meant to Pittsburgh, what he's meant to the NHL, what he's achieving now. I mean, he's literally walking with legends. He was never known as a goal scorer at any point in his career. I know he did win a Rocket Richard, but he's one of 21 men ever to hit 600 goals. And that's not even the thing he was best at or known for. He's like all these milestones. And if you look at that all-time goal list, like he could climb up another 4 or 5 spots this year, depending on what kind of season he ends up having, because there's, he's not that far behind the Iginlas. And I know there's a few players within 8 or 10 goals of him now too. I don't have the list in front of me, but the point is like, he's like, literally this is rarefied air, but he's on a team that's going nowhere. And they just lost 6-1 in the game that he achieved that milestone. And so, I mean, talk about a real, there's like a duality to all that. It's hard to get too excited about it, I guess, in a sense. I mean, it's awesome achievement. I'm really not trying to take anything away from Sid, but the bigger question just hangs out there is just what happens in Pittsburgh? Where do they go from here? This is already looking like the 3rd straight year without the playoffs. I don't have all those answers yet. I stand resolute in anything I've said previously when we've addressed this issue in the pod, that obviously he's a loyal guy. I don't see in any world where I see him moving on this season. I just think if that ever happened, and it's a huge if, it's probably something you're looking at in a summertime for him to get his mind around playing somewhere else. For him to join another team would obviously be a big decision in his life. So Pittsburgh it's a fascinating place these days, man. I mean, it's, Penguins are right at the bottom of the standings. It's hard to find much hope there. And then in the meantime, it just seems like every other night it's Malkin with this milestone, Crosby with this one. It's all this celebration of what these guys have been over a long career. But the truth is they're not in a great place right now when it comes to their team. And, they have to be feeling that. I mean, did you notice Crosby dropped the gloves too? I mean,
yeah, I saw that
in the game over the weekend. So, I mean, you've seen that a few times over his career, but I mean, I think that sums up where he's at. He must be frustrated. I mean, this at the end of the day, this is a guy that didn't play the game trying to win MVP awards or trying to set these kind of milestones. Like he really, from the earliest stages of being an NHL player, just wanted to be part of winning teams. And he was on a lot of winning teams. He's obviously won the 3 Stanley Cups and 2 Olympic gold medals and this and that and that and that and that. But man, he's not winning a lot in Pittsburgh these days, and it's got to be pulling his hair out.
Especially for a guy who seems like he's a loyal soldier to this whole thing, right? Like you would say that's a quality of his, right?
100%. I mean, there's no world he wants to move on. Like no part of him is curious even. Like if it happens, it's going to happen almost against his instincts, right? It's going to happen against what he wants to happen. But, as anyone could tell you that's lived long enough, like sometimes you don't get what you want, right? Like sometimes things don't go the way you envision them or the way you'd imagine. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind the thing he would want most, and probably the same, quite frankly, for Malkin and Letang, would be those guys playing out their last years on competitive teams, seeing that the future was already there. They were helping to mold the next generation, and that they go out together, essentially. But it's probably not going to happen. I mean, that's just the truth, right? I mean, Malkin has 1 more year on his deal after this one. Crosby got 2 more years on his deal. I believe Letang has 3 more years. It's just hard to imagine them all retiring in Pittsburgh. I mean, perhaps none of them will. I mean, we'll have to see kind of where that goes. I mean, I would think, quite honestly, part of the decision will be on what the other guys are doing. Maybe they do stick around for lean years. Maybe they kind of decide that that's the road they want to go down. It's not usually how it goes, though. I'm thinking of Joe Thornton just because seeing his jersey retired over the weekend. Like he was a loyal Shark for a long time, but he spent a year in Toronto and a year in Florida at the end of his career trying to win a Stanley Cup because the Sharks were at a point where they were starting this rebuild that's going on now, and he just I don't blame him. He felt like he couldn't be part of it. Now these guys are maybe in a different situation because they've won cups already, and so it's not like a missing point on their resume that maybe they can get through that. But I don't know. It's like we're not even at the end of November. Pittsburgh isn't anywhere near a playoff race. Like they just feel like they're 2 years away from being 2 years away, and so, which is fine in the big picture. Look at that franchise did so much winning, and has done so much winning. If you extend back to the Lemieux years, I mean, they have 5 Stanley Cups, since the start of the 90s. That's unheard of. Like, do you know how hard it is going to be to win 5 Stanley Cups in a 30-year period for any team now that we're already up to 32 teams? We're probably going to have 34 or 36 in the not too distant future. I mean, they have won more than their share. And so I think organizationally, a bit of a rebuild isn't probably the worst thing, but it's just tough to do while you have those guys there. And so I guess it's not the spirit of your question. The spirit of your question is like, wow, 600 goals. Like almost nobody does this. And we get to see Crosby do it. He's got his parents in the crowd. Like it's a great moment, but then it is a little bit kind of overshadowed, I think, by the elephant in the room. And that's, the one goal that Pittsburgh scored that night was his 600th. Well, Utah put 6 behind Nedeljkovic, and that's not great.
In all fairness, we were going to get to that discussion topic anyway. So yeah, it's even if like I get that I kind of started a little bit more positive, but yes, we were going to talk about the very thing that was just discussed. Like you can't get around it. Crosby wasn't even happy posing with the puck that he scored the 600th goal with. Like, dude is pissed off. At least he looks pissed off. He can't be happy that he's going through what he's going through. There's no chance he's happy. Like, no, come on. No, it's just,
he wants to win, man, but he wants to win in Pittsburgh. Like, that's the thing. Like, if he wanted to, like, ride this out, he could have not signed. Remember, he signed his extension in September. Mm-hmm. He could have been a UFA after this year. Like, he could have, if he wanted to, he could have just selected his destination next summer, and I don't think anyone would have second guessed him. Like, I mean, he's as loyal as players come. He's as like routine oriented. I mean, a lot of players are that, but he's like, he likes things a certain way, and he likes the way they've been. But he also likes playing games that matter, and there's not very many games that are going to matter on that Penguin schedule the way things are going now. And there's still 50 odd 60 games left. I mean, that's going to be a long slog. I would suggest to you, no one will be more excited for the Four Nations than Sidney, because at least there he'll be back in the ultra competitive environment. I just think he'll appreciate that opportunity. That'll probably be a welcome break at that point in the schedule.
For sure. All right. Also, you mentioned Jumbo Joe Thornton getting his, obviously the ceremony for him over the weekend. I presume he'll be your stick tap when we do the show for Thursday.
Well, I don't know. There's still 4 days between then and now. I mean, anything could happen. But I don't know if you saw. I actually watched the whole interview. There's an hour-long interview Jason Demers did with Joe, basically going back over all the sort of high points and some low points of his career. Really, really well done. I recommend it. Demers played with Thornton for a few years in San Jose. Has now moved into a media gig and did a really nice job, I thought, with that conversation. I love Thornton's speech. Like, that guy is he's such a kid at heart, which I say is a compliment. And really just had a lot of joy for the game, and obviously he's feeling the appreciation of being celebrated there. And he said in that interview, it was kind of interesting. He's like, he didn't get his cup, and he's like, but he's over that. He's like, I'm so proud of my career, and he's like, one day the Sharks are going to win one, and I'm going to get to be part. Like, he still feels like he'll be part of it, even though obviously he's not going to be a player or one of those guys bringing the cup there. So, pretty neat. And of course, he's got Macklin Celebrini living at his house this year, and Celebrini kind of below maybe not getting tons of national attention, has been really good when he's been healthy this season. And, I think a real positive light for that Sharks organization. So anyway, long-winded way of saying congratulations, Joe. And I've really enjoyed sort of kind of seeing him celebrated over the last few days.
Number 19, rising to the rafters at the Shark Tank. Well-deserved for Jumbo Joe. All right, time for Ask CJ. You ready for some questions?
Yeah, let's get weird.
Okay, all right. Let's try this weird one. I mean, I don't know how weird this is.
You want to fight 100 buffaloes or one? How like those weird hypotheticals.
All right, if I find a really weird one, maybe I just didn't pick one from the mentions, I'll make sure to find you that today. Here's one from Jamie. I've seen a lot of these, and I'm very curious how you'll answer this one. How do you fix the Ottawa Senators? Trade a core piece, make them eat their failure, encourage them to ride it out. Encourage them and write it out, excuse me.
I feels like they're getting closer to trade the core piece time.
Yep. I'm in that same, this is just me wondering aloud here. You can't keep going through what you're going through year in, year out since you've said that the rebuild is over. I know this current regime didn't explicitly say that, but you've run it back with these pieces over and over. Something at some point has to change. Sorry, not to jump you off here, but
no, but I think we're thinking the same way. And so look at, they didn't hire me. Michael Andlauer hasn't phoned me to get my opinion, or Steve Stais, but I think I'd be looking. There's two things. There's a number of teams around the league that I think are kind of at inflection points, and there's probably a creative trade out there that could change the scope of things. Like, I think you could be trading a guy who's 25 or under and getting another player in a similar spot in their career, and it might be worth doing. Granted, I know those are hard decisions to make because you've drafted these players. You've in some cases in Ottawa, certainly you've signed them to extensions. You think they're part of what's going to be your best years, but it's hard to say just ride it out. No, I know they're going to hope for better goaltending. They're going to hope, obviously, that Allmark is a little bit more like the guy that he's been over the last number of years. It hasn't shown up yet in his play or in his numbers. But I think you're getting close to having to do something not medium to big anyway. It doesn't have to be monster, but I could see that being the move to make.
Like, not to make this all about the Ottawa Senators, but it's such a I'm fascinated at how this team started and then stopped and then started and then stopped. And as we're talking, they're in the midst of a 5-game losing streak in November, which has been a problem for this organization for the last few seasons. And just seeing everyone be as frustrated about the team, which is in contrast to the fact that Steve Stais is a little over a year on the job. Travis Green is new on the job. They have fresh eyes and fresh perspectives who might not share that same level of anxiety, and not to say urgency, I think they're urgent about it, but they don't have that same level of anxiety, and nor do they have the same level of scars that players in that room have or fans around this team have. And it's just really interesting to see them all mix. But I think if you're the Ottawa Senators, I get that if you're in a position where you're not at full strength in terms of losing all those games in a row, it is difficult to come out a winner in some of those trades. But you're right. I think they're getting closer to that point where something is going to have to get done. Some piece in that core is going to have to get moved for a piece that is different, that can help them in an area, whether they need another scoring winger, whether they need another defenseman. They're getting to that point. At the same time, they can beat Calgary on Monday. They could win out on this California trip, put some results together, and we're talking about a completely different team. It's just, I don't know. Some of these,
I don't know,
these
though.
losses,
I think if they go on a 4-game winning streak, I'm still not going to sit here and say they're a different team. Like
fair, very
like
fair.
putting those points in the standings obviously would be huge, and everyone would be feeling good if they were able to do something like that. But I think that question needs to be answered over a whole season or something closer to a full season. The other thing here too, and I know the Bruins have won a couple games since Joe Sacco's taken over for them, but I think Boston's opened the door for other teams maybe to at least dream about getting into that top 4 in the Atlantic, getting a playoff spot. Just because maybe they'll just go on some great streak now and it'll just look like the same 4 teams as always, but it just feels like the possibility is there for someone, and Ottawa's probably the most ready among the teams next, although Buffalo's, kind of hanging tough. Obviously Detroit would like to get in that mix. So anyway, there's the other factor for me is that the division hasn't run away from them yet, even though they have kind of just got off to this meh, spot. So I don't know. It's going to be hard for a GM who's been there for 1 year to make that kind of trade, but it might be what the situation calls for.
Not like he has all the salary cap space in the world either to make such a trade too. They're going to have to be creative.
Right. Well, that's why they get paid the big bucks, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Noel asks, this is more out of curiosity about CJ and his career thus far, but I wonder how his personal passion for sports has influenced his reporting style, and has it transformed through time?
I mean, I love sports. I've always loved sports. Even when I'm not working, I'm watching sports. I don't know about how it's impacted my career. I mean, the one thing I'll say is I always have tried to view the athletes as people first and foremost. And my favorite stories, and obviously this isn't every story I write. I mean, but I like when you can tell a bit of more of a human story. I always think that those kind of stories connect better or best with an audience when you can, basically draw that line. I mean, these aren't just, numbers on a sweater or a player on your fantasy team. I mean, these are actual people that have had to overcome a lot to get where they are, that go through ups and downs within a season, that have challenges, that face doubts, that face a lot of public criticism at times. And so, I don't know if this is the spirit of the question, but I love when I can tell a good human story, which, isn't always there, but those are my favorite stories to tell. And I guess that just comes from being around a long time and, getting to know some of these guys in the way that I do. But yeah, I love sports. I love the people that play it. I love hockey. I love the hockey world. I'm very fortunate to make this my job.
And we're very fortunate to have you in said world, CJ.
Thanks.
A lot of compliments for you today. A lot of love for you.
I know. You're killing me with kindness today. I like it.
I think I'm pretty good at that. Corey Oliver asks, what is the feeling on David Jiricek? If the Blue Jackets trade him, is it in season or is it end of season?
Tough to say. They're definitely having trade conversations as we speak, but that doesn't mean that anything has to get done. Obviously, this is a player that's still very early in his career. I think for Columbus to make that sort of deal, it's a pretty recent 6th overall pick. They're going to be wanting a player in a similar spot back. And so we'll see if they can get something done, but they've definitely had those conversations. I think, at this stage, everybody recognizes that maybe a new start could benefit, everyone involved. I mean, Columbus has just not been a stable organization since Jiricek was drafted. I mean, they're on their second GM since he was drafted. They've had multiple coaches. He hasn't probably had the start to his career that he envisioned, and he's had trouble getting regular minutes in the NHL. He's back in the American Hockey League as we speak now. And so, I certainly the Blue Jackets are working or thinking about a trade, but they're obviously not just going to trade him for nothing. So, it really depends if the right circumstances come along here, but it's definitely possible that he's moved, and I could see it happening in season.
Okay. Next one from David Markovitz. What is the best advice both of you would give for someone aspiring to be an NHL reporter insider?
You go first, buddy.
Just create content. That's pretty basic, but if you want to write, if you want to be in our shoes, you have to. It's one thing to find spaces that will allow you to create content. You just have to, at least in this day and age, I think it's easier to make a blog for yourself, make a podcast, go on TikTok. you have to create content and put yourself in that space and go from there. That's probably the best piece of advice I would do. I would impart on people. It means nothing for you to just say, hey, I would like to do this. Actually go out and do it.
Right on. And carve your own path. I mean, a lot of people ask about sort of like the things that led to me to getting this job. And I'm sure, Julian, you've got versions of that question a lot over the years. And the truth is there's not one roadmap there. And so I think in absolute concert with what Julian's saying here, like create content, but also understand that there's not like there's not one way in, there's not one way to do it perfect. Like, I would just say be comfortable being on your own path and believe in yourself and just go for it. Honestly, I mean, you don't have to wait for permission. I mean, if you do, I've just given you permission to go chase your dreams and to go out there and get it. And I know it's going to be hard and I've had about as lucky and successful a career as I could have hoped for. And there's still lots of shit that happened along the way that wasn't all great. And so the point is that you just have to keep going. You can't beat the person that doesn't want to give up. And so if you really want it, go find a way to do it. Be comfortable in your own shoes, be comfortable being you, find your own way. And one day we'll be rubbing elbows in a press box somewhere and you can tell us that you heard this advice and it maybe helped you on your way.
That advice was beautiful, man. It was really beautiful, man. That was just bring a tear to my eye. Brought a tear to my eye. It was really good. It's really good. Tyler McGillick, are the Rangers in trouble?
It's not good. I mean, they got pushed around in Edmonton. It's hard to ignore that. And, really for the last little while, there's been a lot of ups and downs. I won't go so far as to say they're in trouble. But they certainly got some soul searching to do. They have to find their best game again. And it's worth remembering. I mean, basically every team, even the top teams, go through ups and downs throughout a season. So that's why I'm not smashing any panic buttons here, saying that, they are who we thought we were, but there's no getting around the fact that they are not playing their best hockey. Too many guys not having great seasons to this point for what they're expected to do, what they're paid to do. And, I still think that they're going to be a team to be reckoned with, but right now they look like the 70% version of themselves, give or take.
One more for you. 123 Jazz Hand says, is there actually any chance the Toronto Maple Leafs reacquire one of Ryan O'Reilly or Nazem Kadri, or is that just baseless speculation to stir the pot in Toronto?
Well, it's speculation at this point. I think it's not crazy to bring it up as a possibility just because we know the Leafs are going to be looking for a center at some point this season. I think that's the area they're most likely to make a decent sized acquisition on. And, look, the Flames are in a playoff spot, I believe, or they're darn close to it. I mean, they're near the top of the Pacific Division. I can hear that O'Henry bet coming back on me right now. So, I don't know that they're going to be in a position where they're trading Nazem Kadri. It's in Nashville. It's going to be hard to see them getting back into a playoff spot. But Riley still has a couple years on his deal. Like they don't have to trade him. But I think it's not crazy to think the Leafs would at least poke around and see if there's something that could be done in either case. And those aren't the only two centermen around the league that they might look at too. So what I would say is it's certainly premature to say like they're targeting those guys. Like that's not my understanding, but it's not crazy to at least draw a line in pencil and say like, it's possible. And so I don't know where this has all been coming from lately. I might've missed I don't know who reported what. But what I can tell you is, they're going to be keeping pretty good tabs on the center market. And if either of those guys are available, I certainly think that they'd both be appealing options depending on the price. So you're saying there's a chance? There's a chance, but I mean, it's well below 50% in both cases. Like it's a Hail Mary chance, call it right now. And we'll see if some steam picks up there. I'd have to imagine that Kadri would be willing to come back to Toronto if Calgary's moving on from him. In O'Reilly's case, he doesn't have a no movement clause. So, let's let things play out a little bit more, but it's not like there's active negotiations going on or anything of that nature. All right. Producer Nick, please don't
radio. I mean, we wouldn't radio ourselves, but don't add on to him being radioed for what he just said to that question, because I know someone's going to pick up on
you could cut out a few words and make that look like I said a lot more than I did.
For sure. That's going to do it for our Monday edition of the CJ Show. We'll be back later this week with a brand spanking new episode. Great work as always, Siege.
Thanks, buddy, and I hope you have a great week.
I hope you have a great week too, my man. And that goes for everyone listening or watching the CJ Show. Subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating, however we do it now for podcasts. And we'll talk to you all later next week. Peace. This week. Later next week? Later this week. Sorry. Whoops.
Wow, do you have turkey brain? It's Thanksgiving.
It's American Thanksgiving. I don't have to sell whatever. We're done. Bye, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.